So the first article that I decided to talk about in my thematic journal was the McBride masculine identity piece. I actually found this really interesting because it definitely put into perspective the different struggles that men go through as far as, I want to say, having to fit into society and how problematic men are within their own subculture, I guess. Basically, this article was about how a guy named Brett struggled with his masculine identity due to the friends that he had surrounded himself with. He basically was an athlete in high school, and then in college he decided to stop playing baseball because he wanted to focus on his academic studies and he felt like he didn't have enough time. Eventually he realized that the people that he had become friends with had a very heteronormative view on masculinity and gender. Eventually, towards the end of this article / story, he decided to cave in and start playing baseball again, just because it would be a lot easier, I guess, to fit in than to pursue his own paths and academic interests. Something that I found very interesting about this article was his point of view on pressure that that is put on men. Personally, I always think that I focus on the struggles of women, the struggles of marginalized women, but this gave me kind of a more diverse perspective as far as the things that other people go through regardless of their privilege. So I really enjoyed reading this article, and I really liked the ties that it made to the struggles that women go through as well. The next article that I am going to talk about is the Fausto Sterling article. This article was about the 5 sexes, intersexuality, and I actually found this really interesting because this has actually always been a topic that I've really struggled with, really understanding the difference between sex and gender, and it made me realize how problematic our current classification system is of intersexed individuals. So basically this article was about redefining sex due to beings who were born with non-determinating genitalia. So basically intersexuality is rooted in the basic theories of male and female. Typically, men are men, they're born with XY chromosomes, and then women are female, and they're born with XX chromosomes. They typically have, men typically have facial hair and muscle, and then women are typically, they typically have ovaries and are able to become pregnant. So the 5 sexes basically taught me that not all women or men have a complete set of stated genitalia. You know, some men may have female reproductive organs inside, but on the outside exterior they may have masculine genitalia. So basically, this was a very interesting article to me because I think that the notion of, I don't want to say completely eradicating sex and gender, but basically taking a different approach to it and giving medical professionals a more guided approach as opposed to just choosing that surgical reconstruction to those individuals who don't necessarily have the standard genitalia, and going to more of a therapy approach as opposed to assigning a gender to an individual who has mixed genitalia. I think that that is a much better approach. The next article that I want to talk about is Gender, Class, and Terrorism. This was my favorite article that I read out of the set of articles that we had to read this week. Essentially, to me, this article draws parallels between white male masculinity and terrorist groups. So, essentially what this article talks about is how masculine fragility plays into terrorism. So basically, we have these men, regardless of cultural reasons, but basically men who aren't doing so well as far as their socioeconomic status. I think that they get angry with those who are far off, and they have this sense of entitlement due to their masculinity that makes them feel as though they deserve more than what they're getting. And so eventually they result into acts of terrorism. Something that I never really thought about was the viewpoint, I guess, of these extremist men, and kind of the mindset that comes from that sense of entitlement, because I guess essentially it's kind of a sense of desperation that they're trying to cling on to something so that they don't, I guess, give up. I'm sorry if that. I'm trying to think of a better way to word this, but the parallel that was drawn between neo-Nazi groups and the Taliban, it just is something that I've never really thought about, and I understand how problematic white supremacist groups are, especially as a black female, but I didn't realize the potential of danger that these groups presented when you take into context the history of acts of terrorism. So this article was really interesting to me. Like I said, it was my favorite article. One paragraph that really spoke to me was, the terrors of emasculation experienced by lower middle class men all over the world will no doubt continue as they struggle to make a place for themselves in shrinking economies and inevitably shifting cultures. With the rise of feminism and trying to bridge the gap between wages and just kind of the shifting and awareness, since white men have basically controlled the world throughout all of history, it's just interesting to hear another perspective and why they feel the way that they do and where this sense of entitlement comes from. So, yeah. The next article that I read was the Ivy Chapter 2, Becoming a Woman, Becoming a Man, and Becoming a Person. Basically, this article tackles what exactly influences our identities, what exactly influences why we choose, I don't want to say why we choose, but essentially why we choose our genders. It addresses masculinity and femininity and how our surroundings and biological factors and cultural factors directly influence our identities. This particular chapter kind of ties in with, let's see, which one was that? It really tied in with the Zen Hondoganu and Messner introduction to me, and this also really tied into the initial discussion board post that we did. I really wish that I would have read this article before doing my discussion board post, because it kind of gave me deeper insight as far as how my direct biological and cultural surroundings have directly influenced my identity and my gender. I kind of was aware of the things that directly affected who I was, but I didn't understand some of the scientific points of why I am the way that I am. So, back to this article, the Ivy chapter. I really liked the points that they drew between the parallels between men and women. I never understood why putting a difference between men and women was such an issue, but I really liked they called into question how different really are men and women, and then talked about biological difference between men and women, which ultimately I don't think are that important, because I think that women are capable of anything that men are capable of. But that's besides the point. So yeah, I liked the scientific aspect of this chapter per se, and the things that it tackled, then, giving further insight to that. So yeah. The last one, I think, let's see, the Zen Hondoganu and Messner perspective on sex. It was short and to the point, but like I said previously, it kind of tied in with the Ivy chapter. But basically, it just is talking about the differences between men and women, feminism, perspectives on feminism, why we categorize men and women. It kind of gave an introduction to the 5 sexes article, but I mean, it was short and sweet to the point. Yeah. And then I think the last one that there was the Lorber post-feminism, one. So essentially, it confronts how problematic feminism was initially, and how uninclusive it was to the marginalized identities that weren't included in previous feminism. It basically talks about how societies, it basically breaks down the barriers that previous feminism had concurred on, and how, sorry, I'm just trying to gather my thoughts. It calls into question gender, sex, argues that, sorry, I'm just trying to find my notes. So yeah, it basically is just talking about how postmodern feminism is inclusive to all of the marginalized groups, creates advocacy for queer, homo, and heterosexual identities and people who associate themselves with those terms, advocates for transgendered identities, intersex identities, and things like that. Overall, I think that I've covered all of the articles that we had to read. I don't think that the wooden chapter readings, but I know I'm not supposed to analyze wood, but all of these articles directly tie back to the wood articles, and I just really like how all of the different articles that we are reading directly correlate within one another. And that is all. Thank you.